All right, we're going to try an economics video this morning. American Economics 101 for the past 30 years. And the origins of the supply side revolution. Okay, very briefly, without charts or graphs or other visual aids, beyond the presentation of facts. Fact one. In the mid-1960s, the principal Western industrial nations, specifically the U.S. and the United Kingdom, of the Atlantic powers, had reached a post-war saturation point, okay, in their domestic production for both home consumption and export. There's only so many automobiles, toasters, refrigerators that people can afford and need. While abroad in Europe and Asia, their economies had recovered from their wartime devastation and were now in direct competition with the Atlantic industrial powers for the same markets. This meant a decline in corporate profit. The U.S. in particular was no longer a lord of the world stock market. It could no longer afford the complacency that had led it to churn out the same high-dollar products with little new investment in new technology that had seen it through the post-war years. This meant destroying the high-wage, rising income society of the 1960s and the corporate and public benefits that went with it, the deindustrializing of America, through restructuring, which meant cost slashing, hence the origin of supply-side economics. Actually, the first concrete experiment was, appropriately enough, in Pinochet's terror and torture state of Chile, where the population was kept in check by police repression to serve as human guinea pigs. This so-called success led to its first implementation in the Atlantic zone by the UK under Margaret Thatcher, followed by Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. Its premise is very simple. Slash labor costs, disinvest in older, uncompetitive industries, allow imports to take up the slack, invest in sexy new fields like high-tech, real estate, money markets, or even in the foreign firms importing into the domestic market. What industrial capital investment remains is shifted to so-called maquiladoras, named after the free trade industrial zone on the U.S.-Mexican border, but also applied to such zones in China, Indonesia, and other Asian locations. Here, local workers make products for U.S. companies that may be finally assembled in the U.S. or the U.K. or Germany as domestic products. Tax and tariff avoidance is also a major factor in this shift, as in supply-sideism generally. To keep corporate profits at their inflated 1960s levels, it was also necessary to let them retain their capital gains by major tax slashing, doing a chainsaw massacre on the federal budget. According to the corporate policymakers who developed supply-sideism, it was a social wage, the public benefits of Western prosperity that would have to go, not the military aspects of public expenditure. And why? The Pentagon is a sacred cow, not merely because of military worship. Its continued health is necessary for two reasons. It's the right arm of U.S.-based corporate globalization. Like a strong police force is necessary to keep the homies in the ghetto and the riffraff in general in line at home. For that reason, the military-industrial complex continues as the backbone of what's left of U.S. domestic industry, too profitable to let die, like the U.S. steel industry. That's the modern economic history of the Atlantic world in a nutshell. But it didn't stop there. No. It was the same process that deindustrialized the former Soviet Union and Soviet bloc, using the same words as in the U.S. 10 to 15 years earlier. Perestroika, Russian for that favorite 1970s phrase, restructuring. There, too, public expenditure was the enemy, combined with across-the-board privatization. Muscovite elites were willing to see the destruction of their own industry, society, and state itself, as long as they could live well. This is the end game of supply-siders in the U.S., to destroy a living society for all but a few at the top and turn the West and the U.S. into Russia. That is your future. So, pray well, eat well, tak točno.